Please vote yes on this amendment, Mr. Speaker. In my part of the state, where we like Article 1, Section 24 of the Washington State Constitution and don't want our right to defend ourselves and the state to be impaired, we have a saying. We have a saying that the 80-20 rule applies. That the best kind of work, the best kind of policy, I would say the best kind of law, Mr. Speaker, focuses on the closest point, the tightest point, the most urgent element of a problem. And that if you want to do good, you need to let the sort of peripheral things fall away and focus on where the problem lies. And if the problem in our public policy is gun violence, let's focus this experiment in extra-constitutional regulation where the problem exists. And the problem exists in a handful of locations where guns are often acquired illegally and used illegally. Let's try this experiment where that problem lies, where the most homicides that are gun-related occur, and maybe this extra-constitutional experiment in regulation, maybe it'll work. Vote yes on the amendment, and let's focus this experiment on where the need is most urgent, where gun violence is the biggest problem, and that is in our most populous counties. Vote yes, Mr. Speaker.
Good member from the 19th District, Representative Walsh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Great amendment. Please vote yes. What a great idea. Let's have no permit at all. I like that a lot.
Member will please speak with regards to the policy and refrain from sarcasm, please. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A new standard, refrain from sarcasm, I will. No sarcasm. This is an amendment that protects privacy. Mr. Speaker, while we will hear a lot, I suspect, in our continuing conversation about this constitutionally dubious proposition, the underlying bill, we'll hear a lot about Article 1, Section 24 in our Washington State Constitution, which states clearly that your right to keep and bear a firearm in defense of yourself and your community shall not be impaired, and this permit would certainly be an impairment of your exercise of that right that is reserved to you. I want to talk about Article 1, Section 7, which is the part of the Washington State Constitution that talks about privacy. And in Article 1, Section 7, it says that your right to not be disturbed in your person, in your affairs, is sacrosanct, is reserved to you. The right to privacy that's discussed in our state constitution is a right explicitly enumerated that is not explicitly enumerated in the federal constitution. It's only implied. The language in the underlying bill about what these constitutionally dubious permits would include, the information that they would include, which my good colleague from the 31st has discussed in some detail in his remarks, this is your personal affairs. And to have them kept on a permit, Mr. Speaker, and kept in some form of registry, Mr. Speaker, that is an impairment and an infringement of your right to privacy enumerated in Article 1, Section 7. So while the underlying proposal is constitutionally dubious under Article 1, Section 24, I think it's also constitutionally dubious under Article 1, Section 7, and this good amendment cleans up a little bit of that constitutional defect. Please vote yes, and I mean no sarcasm.
Further remarks, the good member from the 19th, Representative Walsh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a good amendment. Please vote yes. Mr. Speaker, when we charge citizens, residents, to exercise constitutional rights, we are entering a difficult area in the law and in our history, Mr. Speaker. In our history in this country, we used to have poll taxes. Now, it was just $1 or $2. The amount wasn't a great deal. But these poll taxes have been widely and rightly rejected as unconstitutional, as a barrier to the exercise of a right. And we have come to the place, the good place in our law, in our public policy, that you don't charge people for exercising enumerated rights. Now, there are semantic games that are played with what is a fee, what is a tax, but the point is, when you begin charging people, whether you call it a fee or a tax, to exercise a constitutional right, which keeping and bearing a firearm in defense of yourself and the state is, you're in troubled ground. You're in constitutionally dubious ground. Now, you'll hear references, well, you have to pay a fee to get a driver's license. Well, driving is not an enumerated constitutional right. It's a privilege. And even though it may be considered controversial, keeping and bearing a gun in your home or on your person or in your vehicle in defense of yourself is an enumerated constitutional right. We should not be charging people to exercise that right. What this amendment is trying to do, and it doesn't even do it completely, but it gets us in the direction of not charging many people for the right to exercise their right. It's a good amendment. It's made in good faith. Please vote yes.
Remarks. Representative Walsh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment is a little technical. This has to do with what happens if the bureaucrats screw up and wrongly deny you the permit to purchase, the constitutionally dubious permit to purchase, or a CPL or other permits related to keeping and bearing a firearm. Currently, basically, the amendment rolls back the standard to where it is now in the law. What the underlying bill would do is it would make you go to Superior Court and basically sue the state to try to get the wrong conclusion righted. What this does is it says, no, do away with that and go back to what we've got, where you can go directly to the agency and use what's called a writ of mandamus to try to get the bad decision corrected. To spare the technicality as we're into the early morning here, it's a little easier to do it that way than to have to sue in Superior Court. So really, Mr. Speaker, the elegance of the amendment is it just goes back to the existing standard in our law. For simplicity's sake, for making things simpler for someone who got treated poorly by bureaucrats running this fakakta program, please vote yes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good amendment. Please vote yes. We have seen in some of the background checks and other responsibilities that we put on the State Patrol in recent years, some issues, some challenges, some problems. Some of them have been technical, more of a computer database nature. Some of them have just been kind of organizational, logistical, difficulty getting background checks running the way they're supposed to. Since so much is being required of the State Patrol to implement the underlying policy, I think it's only practical and realistic that we make sure that the State Patrol has the systems in place to do this background check. I guess to create the registry and do all the other constitutionally dubious things that we would be charging it to do in the underlying policy. If they're not even ready to go by the date specific, we would be yet again in one of these situations where we're going to have to fix a broken policy with some future duct tape in this body. Let's not do that. Let's make sure that the State Patrol is ready to implement the fakakta policy before we begin the program. Please vote yes on the amendment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's an essential amendment. Please vote yes. Mr. Speaker, your right to buy and keep a gun for your own protection is specifically enumerated in both the state and federal constitutions, and what someone else might want in your experience, in your training, relevant to your exercise of that right, is not relevant. You have that right. It is specifically enumerated. And what I love about our state constitution in Article 1, Section 24 is it says why it's specifically enumerated. That you can defend yourself, and by defending yourself, by extension, you defend your neighbors in the whole state. This is an essential, foundational, constitutional right, and what other people think that you ought to do before you exercise that right is not germane. The amendment protects your ability to exercise that right because, as you've heard, and it's true, live fire training is hard to find and it's expensive. It is a barrier to your exercise of that constitutional right. And, Mr. Speaker, more, you've got to do it repeatedly under the proposal in the underlying bill. No, it's a restriction on your ability to exercise your right. Protect that right and vote yes on this amendment. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just want to finish up the thought and the argument that was made by the gentleman from the 15th. Again, it is 18 U.S. Code 926. And this gets to the heart of the issue of this amendment and the problem in the underlying policy that the amendment remedies. Madam Speaker, it is a serious matter, this matter of registries, this matter of lists, of databases. It is important to protecting the foundational right that you have and I have to protect ourselves with guns, with firearms, that they not be kept in registries. It's been a concern since the founding days of this country and this state that the government would keep lists of people and whether they were armed and how they were armed. It is essential to the independence and the freedom of a free people that the government does not keep these records. It's in federal law. It's been supported by a history of case law in our country. And Madam Speaker, I really believe it is essential to our notion of privacy rights that the government doesn't keep registries like this. Madam Speaker, if tyrants ever get control of government, they count on such databases, on such registries to do their nefarious work. It is essential that you and I protect our freedom, our liberty, our constitutional rights by not creating such databases, such registries. And that's what the amendment seeks to do in the underlying policy. We have to protect these civil liberties, Madam Speaker, and avoiding these registries is essential to protecting these civil liberties. Please vote yes on the amendment. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I believe this is a good amendment. As the previous speaker said, it allows for other options by which an individual could establish mastery and training of firearms use. And Madam Speaker, I think we need to be clear about what the essential parts of the underlying policy really are. I mean, is the essential part of the underlying policy to mandate a certification? Or is it to create a permitting process by which the sale or purchase of firearms could be regulated? It's my understanding, having read the proposal numerous times, that it's the second, not the first. In any event, Madam Speaker, this amendment simplifies and clarifies the mechanics of the underlying proposal. I guess we can discuss what those may be as we go along, but please vote yes on this clarifying amendment. Madam Speaker, I am also asking for a yes on this amendment. And Madam Speaker, I think you can guess where I'm going. Based on what we've heard already, you're seeing the argument for the yes vote on the amendment, which really is a matter of preventing a chilling effect. Frankly, Madam Speaker, it's sort of intimidating if a state agency asks you not just your race and your gender, but wants you to describe yourself to the agency, to the government, into the database. That's intimidating, Madam Speaker. And I think it is designed, I believe, to flex the power of the state, remind the applicant for this permit who's got the power. And Madam Speaker, that is not a good look for the government. That's not a good look for the community. That's not a good look for anything we like in our public policy. Let's not begin to put in place a chilling effect on a person's exercise of their constitutional rights. I don't care what your gender is. I don't care what your race is. If you're here and you're a citizen or a legal resident of this state, you have the right to keep and bear a firearm in defense of yourself and your community. And that goes for black people, that goes for brown people, that goes for men, for women, and all in between. You have a right to defend yourself. It doesn't matter what you look like. Please vote yes on the amendment. Thank you, Madam Speaker. As we mentioned before, this amendment remedies something in the underlying bill, which is a convergence of really two constitutional rights. Of course, your right to keep and bear a firearm in defense of yourself, and also your Article 1, Section 7 right to privacy. And as you well know, Madam Speaker, that the state's right to privacy is more explicit and more clearly stated and stronger, in my opinion, than any federal implication of penumbras of a right to privacy. In our Constitution, it says it straight up. You have a right to privacy, that you can't be disturbed in your person and your affairs. And surely, collecting this kind of information, mental health, physical health, other really personal information, is disturbing you and your person and your affairs. And as others have said, but maybe not put quite a fine point on it, Madam Speaker, what a rich target such a database of information would be to bad actors out there in the world. If we have a centralized registry of information, not only of our race and our gender and our physical description, but our medical records, this would be a ripe target for bad actors and cyber hackers and thieves all around the world. This is the reason why, Madam Speaker, we shouldn't have these registries. And this is the reason why this amendment is essential to protect our constitutional right to privacy. Please vote yes on the amendment. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, of course, justice delayed is justice denied. This amendment hastens the timeline for completing this vetting of people before they exercise their constitutional right to defend themselves. Madam Speaker, it is eminently reasonable to move this timeline from 60 days to 30 days. As the good gentleman from the 9th mentioned, if someone is trying to arm themselves to be better defended, to be more secure in their, or let me say it, her person, then 30 days is probably too long, but it's better than 60 days. And 30 days would give the bureaucracy time enough to implement the background check, the vetting. Madam Speaker, I can't believe I'm even saying this. The vetting to allow the exercise of an enumerated constitutional right. It is a practical improvement to the underlying policy. Please vote yes on the amendment. Thank you, Madam Speaker. The fiscal concerns here are legitimate. But, Madam Speaker, I think the real reason to vote yes on this amendment is that it acknowledges a fallacy of assumption in the underlying bill, which is that increasing the regulatory strictures around law-abiding gun owners with annual checks on their legal status to keep and impair a firearm does nothing about the unlawful criminals who use guns in crimes. It is a constant challenge when we talk about public safety issues. This belief that making the strictures, making the regulations, making the oversight of lawful gun owners will somehow change the actions of people who disregard the law. We're tightening the regulatory strictures on the wrong people here. Now, it is true that this annual update to the database is going to cost the State Patrol more money, I think, than it even estimates now. But the real reason to vote yes on this amendment, Madam Speaker, is it redirects by a few degrees the focus of our public policy away from scrutinizing lawful people and, by contrast, I hope, moving our focus for public safety where it belongs, to the criminals who disregard all of the public policy points in the underlying bill. Please vote yes on this amendment. Thank you, Madam Speaker. All deference to my good seatmate, my concern is less fiscal and more philosophical here. There is absolutely concern, Madam Speaker, in that this annual report to the legislature would involve, okay, yes, anonymized and aggregated information, but frankly, we've heard that before and seen cybersecurity standards not kept up to snuff. But the real problem here is reporting on the process, including the appeals and resolution of appeals. Madam Speaker, this is a bureaucracy in the making, a bureaucracy designed to restrict the exercise of an enumerated constitutional right. We should not be building a ziggurat of bureaucracy on a foundation of an impaired right. That is a recipe for architectural and legal and constitutional disaster. Please vote yes on the amendment to pull a few bricks out of that wobbly edifice.
It has been moved and seconded that Amendment 273 be adopted. Remarks, Representative Walsh.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This amendment untangles an entanglement in the underlying bill between the constitutionally dubious restrictions that the underlying bill creates and the equally, I don't know, perhaps more constitutionally dubious extreme risk protection orders that our state has created. Basically, it says if a court issues an extreme risk protection orders, that's a ERPO, that's a red flag law, it does not have to automatically notify anyone else related to this restrictive permit that would be proposed about the red flag ERPO. Madam Speaker, we've spoken before about how the underlying policy has problems with Article 1, Section 24, with Article 1, Section 7 of the state constitution. This amendment fixes an Article 1, Section 3 problem with the underlying policy and, of course, the red flag ERPO nonsense. Article 1, Section 3 says that you cannot be deprived of any of your constitutional rights without the due process of law. Now, these red flag things, they are already troubled with Article 1, Section 3 by denying due process. The underlying policy, Madam Speaker, is also plagued by problems with Article 1, Section 3 because it has denial of due process issues in the mechanics of how this restrictive permit would be implemented. So we got a lot of trouble here, Madam Speaker. The amendment at least bifurcates the two sets of constitutional problems and simplifies the trouble to at least a one variable issue within the underlying policy. Let's focus on the due process problems and the right to keep and bear arms problems and the privacy problems that are replete in the underlying policy. Let's not add additional constitutional problems by hooking it up with the red flag ERPOs. It's a good amendment, Madam Speaker. It improves the underlying bill, I guess. The underlying bill's got a lot of problems. It helps a little bit. Please vote yes.
Engross second substitute House Bill 1163 on third reading and final passage. Remarks. The good member from the 19th District, Representative Walsh.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This may be the worst bad bill we've seen so far this session. Please vote no. Madam Speaker, there are three constitutional defects with this bill. First, it violates your due process rights. That's Article 1, Section 3 of the Washington State Constitution. Second, it violates your privacy rights. That's Article 1, Section 7 of the Washington State Constitution. And third, it violates your right to defend yourself with a firearm. That's Article 1, Section 24 of the state constitution. And Madam Speaker, it probably violates other portions of the state constitution. Madam Speaker, we have heard that the reason to support this bad policy are primarily want and fear. Madam Speaker, wants and fears do not dominate or overtake or undermine your constitutional rights specifically enumerated in our founding document. Madam Speaker, we have heard that there are gunshots and violence around our state. Madam Speaker, I put it to you that that is because we have been undermining the right of lawful people to defend themselves for a decade plus. And rather than acknowledging the failure of these policies, that they have enabled criminals to act more recklessly and with greater disregard for civil society, we're doubling down on the same failed ideology. Enough, Madam Speaker, enough. When I was first elected to this position almost a decade ago, Madam Speaker, an angry and intemperate person threatened my 3 daughters. He said to teach us a lesson about abortion, he was going to rape my daughters. Now, he was probably just an unhinged individual, but my daughters may have exercised their constitutional right to self-defense. Madam Speaker, my daughters may have legally obtained concealed pistol licenses. Of course, I would recommend to them never to say whether they had or not.
30 seconds.
My daughters may carry firearms to defend themselves. They may carry a Glock 19. They may carry a Kel-Tec 380. I don't know, and if they did, I would tell them not to advertise that. But Madam Speaker, my daughters have not been raped. My daughters have not been molested. My daughters have not been killed.